The studio was filled with the rich odor of roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of lilac, or the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn. From the corner of the divan of Persian saddlebags, on which he was lying smoking, as was his custom, innumerable cigarettes, Lord Henry Wotton could just catch the gleam of the honey-sweet, honey-colored blossoms of a laburnum. Its tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of a beauty so flame-like as theirs. And now and then, the fantastic shadows of birds in flight flitted across the long tussar silk curtains stretched before the huge window, producing a kind of momentary Japanese effect, and making him think of those pallid, jade-faced painters of Tokyo who, through the medium of an art that is necessarily immobile, seek to convey the sense of swiftness and motion. The sullen murmur of bees, shouldering their way through the long, unmown grass, or circling with monotonous insistence around the dusty gilt horns of the straggling woodbine, seemed to make the stillness more oppressive. The dim roar of London was like the burdened note of a distant organ. In the center of the room, clamped to an upright easel, stood the full-length portrait of a young man of extraordinary personal beauty. And in front of it, some little distance away, sat the artist himself, Basil Hallward, whose sudden disappearance some years ago caused such public excitement and gave rise to many strange conjectures. As the painter looked at the gracious and comely form he had so skillfully mirrored in his art, a smile of pleasure passed across his face, seeming about to linger there. But suddenly he started up. Closing his eyes, he placed his fingers upon his lids, as though he sought to imprison within his brain some curious dream from which he feared he might awake. "It is your best work, Basil, the best thing you have ever done," said Lord Henry languidly. "You must certainly send it next year to the Grosvenor. The Academy is too large and too vulgar. Whenever I have gone there, there have been either so many people that I could not see the pictures, which was dreadful, or so many pictures that I could not see the people, which was worse. The Grosvenor is really the only place." "I don't think I shall send it anywhere," he answered, tossing his head back in that odd way that used to make his friends laugh at him at Oxford. "No, I won't send it anywhere." Lord Henry elevated his eyebrows and looked at him in amazement through the thin blue wreaths of smoke curling in fanciful whorls from his heavy, opium-tainted cigarette. "Not send it anywhere? My dear fellow, why? Have you any reason? What odd chaps you painters are. You do anything in the world to gain a reputation. As soon as you have one, you seem to want to throw it away. It is silly of you, for there is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. A portrait like this would set you far above all the young men in England, and make the old men quite jealous, if old men are ever capable of any emotion." "I know you will laugh at me," he replied, "but I really can't exhibit it. I have put too much of myself into it." "Too much of yourself in it? Upon my word, Basil, I didn't know you were so vain, and I really can't see any resemblance between you, with your rugged, strong face and coal-black hair, and this young Adonis, who looks as if he was made of ivory and rose leaves. Why, my dear Basil, he is a Narcissus, and you, well, of course, you have an intellectual expression and all that, but beauty, real beauty, ends where an intellectual expression begins. Intellect is itself a mode of exaggeration, and it destroys the harmony of any face. The moment one sits down to think, one becomes all nose or all forehead or something horrid. Look at the successful men in any learned profession, how perfectly hideous they are, except, of course, in the church. But then, in the church, they don't think. A bishop keeps on saying at 80 what he was told to say at 18. As a natural consequence, he always looks absolutely delightful. Where mysterious young friend, whose name you never told me, but whose picture fascinates me, never thinks. I feel quite sure of that. He is some brainless, beautiful creature who should always be here in winter when we have no flowers to look at, and always here in summer when we want something to chill our intelligence. Don't flatter yourself, Basil. You are not in the least like him." "You don't understand me, Harry," answered the artist. Of course I'm not like him. I know that perfectly well. Indeed, I should be sorry to look like him. You shrug your shoulders? I'm telling you the truth. There is a fatality about all physical and intellectual distinction, the sort of fatality that seems to dog through history the faltering steps of kings. It is better not to be different from one's fellows. The ugly and the stupid have the best of it in this world. They can sit at their ease and gape at the play. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. They live as we all should live, undisturbed, indifferent, and without disquiet. They neither bring ruin upon others, nor ever receive it from alien hands. Your rank and wealth, Harry, my brains such as they are, my art, whatever it may be worth, Dorian Gray's good looks, we shall all suffer for what the gods have given us. Suffer terribly. Dorian Gray? Is that his name? Asked Lord Henry, as he walked across the studio towards Basil Hallward. Yes, that is his name. I didn't intend to tell it to you. Oh, I can't explain. When I like people immensely, I never tell their names to anyone. It is like surrendering a part of them. I have grown to love secrecy. It seems to be the one thing that can make modern life mysterious or marvelous to us. The commonest thing is delightful, if one only hides it. When I leave town now, I never tell my people where I am going. If I did, I would lose all my pleasure. It is a silly habit, I dare say, but somehow it seems to bring a great deal of romance into one's life. I suppose you think me awfully foolish about it? Not at all, answered Lord Henry. Not at all, my dear Basil. You seem to forget that I am married, and the one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. I never know where my wife is, and my wife never knows what I am doing. When we meet, we do meet occasionally. When we dine out together or go down to the Duke's, we tell each other the most absurd stories with the most serious faces. My wife is very good at it, much better, in fact, than I am. She never gets confused over her dates, and I always do, but when she does find me out, she makes no row at all. I sometimes wish she would, but she merely laughs at me. I hate the way you talk about your married life, Harry, said Basil Hallward, strolling towards the door that led into the garden. I believe you are really a very good husband, but that you are thoroughly ashamed of your own virtues. You are an extraordinary fellow. You never say a moral thing, and you never do a wrong thing. Your cynicism is simply a pose. Being natural is simply a pose, and the most irritating pose I know, cried Lord Henry, laughing. The two young men went out into the garden together and ensconced themselves on a long bamboo seat that stood in the shade of a tall laurel bush. The sunlight slipped over the polished leaves, and in the grass, white daisies were tremulous. After a pause, Lord Henry pulled out his watch. I am afraid I must be going, Basil, he murmured. But before I go, I insist on your answering a question I put to you some time ago. What is that? Said the painter, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. You know quite well. I do not, Harry. Well, I will tell you what it is. I want you to explain to me why you won't exhibit Dorian Gray's picture. I want the real reason. I told you the real reason. No, you did not. You said it was because there was too much of yourself in it. Now that is childish. Harry, said Basil Hallward, looking him straight in the face, every portrait painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. Rather, it is the painter who on the colored canvas reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture? Because I am afraid I have shown the secret of my own soul. Lord Henry laughed. And what is that? He asked. I will tell you, said Hallward, though an expression of perplexity crossed his face. I am all expectation, Basil, continued his companion, glancing at him. Oh, there is really very little to tell, Harry, answered the painter, and I am afraid you will hardly understand it. Perhaps you will hardly believe it. Lord Henry smiled, leaning down to pluck a pink-petaled daisy from the grass, examining it. I am quite sure I shall understand it, he replied, gazing intently at the little golden, white-feathered disk. And as for believing things, I can believe anything, provided that it is quite incredible. The wind shook some blossoms from the trees. The heavy lilac blooms with their clustering stars moved to and fro in the languid air. A grasshopper began to chirrup by the wall, and, like a blue thread, a long, thin dragonfly floated past on its brown gauze wings. Lord Henry felt as if he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating, and wondered what was coming. "The story is simply this," said the painter after some time.
2 months ago, I went to a crush at Lady Brandon's. You know, we poor artists have to show ourselves in society from time to time,
Just to remind the public that we are not savages. With an evening coat and a white tie, as you told me once, anybody, even a stockbroker, can gain a reputation for being civilized. Well, after about 10 minutes in the room, talking to huge overdressed dowagers and tedious academicians, I suddenly became conscious that someone was looking at me. I turned halfway round and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I did not want any external influence in my life. You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I've always been my own master, at least I always had been, until I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you, something seemed to tell me I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do so. It was a sort of cowardice. Conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil. Conscience is the trade name of the firm. That is all. I don't believe that, Harry, and I don't believe you do either. However, whatever my motive, and it may have been pride, for I used to be very proud, I certainly struggled to the door. There, of course, I stumbled against Lady Brandon. "You are not going to run away so soon, Mr. Hallward," she screamed. You know her curiously shrill voice?
Yes, she is a peacock in everything but beauty,
said Lord Henry, pulling the daisy to bits with his long, nervous fingers. I could not get rid of her. She brought me up to royalties, people with stars and garters, and elderly ladies with gigantic tiaras and parrot noses. She spoke of me as her dearest friend. I had only met her once before, but she took it into her head to lionize me. I believe some picture of mine had made a great success at the time, or at least had been chattered about in the penny newspapers, which is the 19th century standard of immortality. Suddenly, I found myself face to face with the young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met again. It was reckless of me, but I asked Lady Brandon to introduce me to him. Perhaps it was not so reckless after all. It was simply inevitable. We would have spoken to each other without any introduction. I am sure of that. Dorian told me so afterwards. He too felt that we were destined to know each other. And how did Lady Brandon describe this wonderful young man? Asked his companion. I know she likes to give a rapid précis of all her guests. I remember her bringing me up to a truculent, red-faced old gentleman covered all over with orders and ribbons, and hissing into my ear, in a tragic whisper that must have been perfectly audible to everyone in the room, the most astounding details. I simply fled. I like to find out people for myself. But Lady Brandon treats her guests exactly as an auctioneer treats his goods. She either explains them entirely away or tells you everything about them, except what you want to know. Oh, something like, charming boy, poor dear mother and I, absolutely inseparable. Quite forget what he does, afraid he doesn't do anything. Oh yes, plays the piano. Or is it the violin, dear Mr. Gray? Neither of us could help laughing, and we became friends at once. Laughter is not at all a bad beginning for a friendship, and it is far the best ending for one, said the young lord. Hallward shook his head. You don't understand what friendship is, Harry, he murmured. Or what enmity is, for that matter. You like everyone. That is to say, you are indifferent to everyone. How horribly unjust of you, cried Lord Henry, tilting his hat back and looking up at the little clouds-like raveled skeins of glossy white silk drifting across the hollowed turquoise of the summer sky. Yes, horribly unjust of you. I make a great difference between people. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They're all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? I should think it was, Harry, but according to your category, I must be merely an acquaintance. My dear old Basil, you are much more than an acquaintance, and much less than a friend, a sort of brother, I suppose. Oh, brothers, I don't care for brothers. My elder brother won't die, and my younger brothers seem never to do anything else. My dear fellow, I am not quite serious, but I can't help detesting my relations. I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ourselves. I quite sympathize with the rage of the English democracy against what they call the vices of the upper orders. The masses feel that drunkenness, stupidity, and immorality should be their own special property, and that if any one of us makes an ass of himself, he is poaching on their preserves. When poor Southwark got into the divorce court, their indignation was quite magnificent, and yet I don't suppose that 10% of the proletariat live correctly. I don't agree with a single word that you have said, and what is more, Harry, I feel sure you don't either. Lord Henry stroked his pointed brown beard and tapped the toe of his patent leather boot with a tasseled ebony cane. How English you are, Basil. That is the second time you have made that observation. If one puts forward an idea to a true Englishman, always a rash thing to do, he never dreams of considering whether the idea is right or wrong. The only thing he considers of any importance is whether one believes it oneself. Now, the value of an idea has nothing whatsoever to do with the sincerity of the man who expresses it. However, I don't propose to discuss politics, sociology, or metaphysics with you. I like persons better than principles, and I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world. Tell me more about Mr. Dorian Gray. How often do you see him? Every day. I couldn't be happy if I didn't see him every day. He is absolutely necessary to me. How extraordinary! I thought you would never care for anything but your art. He is all my art to me now, said the painter gravely. I sometimes think, Harry, that there are only two eras of any importance in the world's history. The first is the appearance of a new medium for art, and the second is the appearance of a new personality for art also. What the invention of oil painting was to the Venetians, the face of Antinous was to late Greek sculpture, and the face of Dorian Gray will someday be to me. It is not merely that I paint from him, draw from him, sketch from him. Of course, I have done all that. But he is much more to me than a model or a sitter. I won't tell you that I am dissatisfied with what I have done of him, or that his beauty is such that art cannot express it. There is nothing that art cannot express, and I know that the work I have done since I met Dorian Gray is good work, the best work of my life. But in some curious way, I wonder, will you understand me? His personality has suggested to me an entirely new manner in art, an entirely new mode of style. I see things differently. I think of them differently. I can now recreate life in a way that was hidden from me before. A dream of form in days of thought. Who is it who says that? I forget, but it is what Dorian Gray has been to me. The merely visible presence of this lad, for he seems to me little more than a lad, though he is really over 20, his merely visible presence. I wonder, can you realize all that that means? Unconsciously, he defines for me the lines of a fresh school, a school that is to have in it all the passion of the romantic spirit, all the perfection of the spirit that is Greek. The harmony of soul and body, how much that is. We, in our madness, have separated the two, and have invented a realism that is vulgar, an ideality that is void. Harry, if you only knew what Dorian Gray is to me. You remember that landscape of mine, for which Agnew offered me such a huge price, but which I would not part with. It is one of the best things I have ever done. And why is it so? Because while I was painting it, Dorian Gray sat beside me. Some subtle influence passed from him to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw in the plain woodland the wonder I had always looked for. Basil, this is extraordinary. I must see Dorian Gray. Hallward got up from the seat and walked up and down the garden. After some time, he came back. Harry, he said, Dorian Gray is to me simply a motive in art. You might see nothing in him, I see everything in him. He is never more present in my work than when no image of him is there. He is a suggestion, as I have said, of a new manner. I find him in the curves of certain lines, in the loveliness and subtleties of certain colors. That is all. Then why won't you exhibit his portrait? Asked Lord Henry. Because without intending it, I have put into it some expression of all this curious artistic idolatry of which, of course, I have never cared to speak to him. He knows nothing about it. He shall never know anything about it. But the world might guess it, and I will not bare my soul to their shallow, prying eyes. My heart shall never be put under their microscope. There's too much of myself in the thing, Harry. Too much of myself. Poets are not so scrupulous as you are. They know how useful passion is for publication. Nowadays, a broken heart will run to many editions. I hate them for it, cried Hallward. An artist should create beautiful things, but should put nothing of his own life into them. We live in an age when men treat art as if it were meant to be a form of autobiography. We have lost the abstract sense of beauty. Someday, I will show the world what it is, and for that reason, the world shall never see my portrait of Dorian Gray. I think you are wrong, Basil, but I won't argue with you. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue. Tell me, is Dorian Gray very fond of you? The painter considered for a few moments. He likes me, he answered after a pause. I know he likes me. Of course. I flatter him dreadfully. I find a strange pleasure in saying things to him that I know I shall be sorry for having said. As a rule, he is charming to me, and we sit in the studio and talk of 1,000 things. Now and then, however, he is horribly thoughtless, and seems to take a real delight in giving me pain. Then I feel, Harry, that I have given away my whole soul to someone who treats it as if it were a flower to put in his coat, a bit of decoration to charm his vanity, an ornament for a summer's day. Days in summer, Basil, are apt to linger, murmured Lord Henry. Perhaps you will tire sooner than he will. It is a sad thing to think of, but there is no doubt that genius lasts longer than beauty. That accounts for the fact that we all take such pains to over-educate ourselves. In the wild struggle for existence, we want to have something that endures, and so we fill our minds with rubbish and facts, in the silly hope of keeping our place. The thoroughly well-informed man, that is the modern ideal, and the mind of the thoroughly well-informed man is a dreadful thing. It is like a bric-a-brac shop, all monsters and dust with everything priced above its proper value. I think you will tire first all the same. Someday, you will look at your friend and he will seem to you a little out of drawing, or you won't like his tone of color, or something. You will bitterly reproach him in your own heart, and seriously think that he has behaved very badly to you. The next time he calls, you will be perfectly cold and indifferent. It will be a great pity, for it will alter you. What you have told me is quite a romance of art, one might call it. And the worst of having a romance of any kind is that it leaves one so unromantic. Harry, don't talk like that. As long as I live, the personality of Dorian Gray will dominate me. You can't feel what I feel. You change too often. Ah, my dear Basil, that is exactly why I can feel it. Those who are faithful know only the trivial side of love. It is the faithless who know love's tragedies. And Lord Henry struck a light on a dainty silver case and began to smoke a cigarette with a self-conscious, satisfied air, as if he had summed up the world in a phrase. There was a rustle of chirruping sparrows in the green lacquer leaves of the ivy, and the blue cloud shadows chased themselves across the grass like swallows. How pleasant it was in the garden, and how delightful other people's emotions were, much more delightful than their ideas, it seemed to him. One's own soul and the passions of one's friends, those were the fascinating things in life. He pictured to himself, with silent amusement, the tedious luncheon that he had missed by staying so long with Basil Hallward. Had he gone to his aunt's, he would have been sure to meet Lord Goodbody there, and the whole conversation would have been about the feeding of the poor and the necessity for model lodging houses. Each class would have preached the importance of those virtues, for whose exercise there was no necessity in their own lives. The rich would have spoken on the value of thrift, and the idle grown eloquent over the dignity of labor. It was charming to have escaped all that. As he thought of his aunt, an idea seemed to strike him. He turned to Hallward and said, "My dear fellow, I have just remembered." "Remembered what, Harry?" "Where I heard the name of Dorian Gray." "Where was it?" asked Hallward, with a slight frown. "Don't look so angry, Basil. It was at my aunt, Lady Agatha's. She told me she had discovered a wonderful young man who was going to help her in the East End, and that his name was Dorian Gray. I am bound to state that she never told me he was good-looking. Women have no appreciation of good looks. At least, good women have not. She said that he was very earnest and had a beautiful nature. I at once pictured to myself a creature with spectacles and lank hair, horribly freckled, and tramping about on huge feet. I wish I had known it was your friend." "I am very glad you didn't, Harry." "Why?" "I don't want you to meet him." "You don't want me to meet him?" "No." "Mr. Dorian Gray is in the studio, sir," said the butler, coming into the garden. "You must introduce me now," cried Lord Henry, laughing. The painter turned to his servant, who stood blinking in the sunlight. "Ask Mr. Gray to wait, Parker. I shall be in a few moments." The man bowed and went up the walk. Then he looked at Lord Henry. "Dorian Gray is my dearest friend," he said. "He has a simple and beautiful nature. Your aunt was quite right in what she said of him. Don't spoil him. Don't try to influence him. Your influence would be bad. The world is wide and has many marvelous people in it. Don't take away from me the one person who gives to my art whatever charm it possesses. My life as an artist depends on him. Mind, Harry, I trust you." He spoke very slowly, and the words seemed wrung out of him almost against his will. "What nonsense you talk," said Lord Henry, smiling. Taking Hallward by the arm, he almost led him into the house. As they entered, they saw Dorian Gray. He was seated at the piano, his back to them, turning over the pages of a volume of Schumann's Forest Scenes. "You must lend me these, Basil," he cried. "I want to learn them. They are perfectly charming." "That entirely depends on how you sit today, Dorian." "Oh, I am tired of sitting, and I don't want a life-sized portrait of myself," answered the lad, swinging round on the music stool in a willful, petulant manner. When he caught sight of Lord Henry, a faint blush colored his cheeks for a moment, and he started up. "I beg your pardon, Basil, but I didn't know you had anyone with you." "This is Lord Henry Wotton, Dorian, an old Oxford friend of mine. I have just been telling him what a capital sitter you were, and now you have spoiled everything." "You have not spoiled my pleasure in meeting you, Mr. Gray," said Lord Henry, stepping forward and extending his hand. "My aunt has often spoken to me about you. You are one of her favorites, and I am afraid one of her victims also." "I am in Lady Agatha's black books at present," answered Dorian with a funny look of penitence. I promised to go to a club in Whitechapel with her last Tuesday. Oh, I will make your peace with my aunt. She is quite devoted to you, and I don't think it really matters about your not being there. The audience probably thought it was a duet. When Aunt Agatha sits down to the piano, she makes quite enough noise for two people. That is very horrid to her, and not very nice to me, answered Dorian. Lord Henry looked at him. Yes, he was certainly wonderfully handsome, with finely curved scarlet lips, frank blue eyes, crisp gold hair. There was something in his face that made one trust him at once. All the candor of youth was there, as well as youth's passionate purity. One felt he had kept himself unspotted from the world. No wonder Basil Hallward worshipped him. You are too charming to go in for philanthropy, Mr. Gray. Far too charming. And Lord Henry flung himself down on the divan and opened his cigarette case. The painter had been busy mixing his colors and getting his brushes ready. He looked worried. When he heard Lord Henry's last remark, he glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Harry?" Lord Henry smiled and looked at Dorian Gray. Am I to go? Oh, I don't know that I shall tell you that. Hallward bit his lip. If Dorian wishes it. Lord Henry took up his hat and gloves. You are very pressing. Basil. Stay. But what about my man at the Orleans? The painter laughed. I don't think there will be any difficulty about that. Sit down again. Dorian Gray stepped up on the dais with the air of a young Greek martyr and made a little moue of discontent to Lord Henry, whom he had rather taken a fancy to. He was so unlike Basil. They made a delightful contrast, and he had such a beautiful voice. After a few moments he said to him, Have you really a very bad influence? There is no such thing as a good influence. Why? Because to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts. Just turn your head a little more to the right. And yet, and. Stop, faltered Dorian Gray. For nearly 10 minutes he stood there, motionless, with parted lips and eyes strangely bright. He was dimly conscious that fresh influences were at work within him, yet they seemed to come really from himself. The few words that Basil's friend had said, words spoken by chance, no doubt, and with willful paradox, had touched some secret chord, never touched before, now vibrating, throbbing with curious pulses. Music had stirred him like that. Music had troubled him many times. But music was not articulate. It was not a new world, but rather another chaos that it created in us. Words, mere words. How terrible they were, how clear, vivid, and cruel. One could not escape them. And yet, what subtle magic there was. They seemed able to give plastic form to formless things, and had a music of their own, as sweet as that of viol or lute. Mere words. Was there anything so real as words? Yes, there had been things in his boyhood that he had not understood. He understood them now. Life suddenly became fiery-colored to him. It seemed as if he had been walking in fire. Why had he not known it? With a subtle smile, Lord Henry watched him. He knew the precise psychological moment to say nothing. He felt intensely interested, amazed at the sudden impression his words had produced. Remembering a book he'd read at 16, one that revealed much unknown, he wondered if Dorian Gray was passing through a similar experience. He had merely shot an arrow into the air. Had it hit the mark? Hallward painted away with that marvelous, bold touch of his, true refinement and perfect delicacy, which in art, at any rate, comes only from strength. He was unconscious of the silence. Basil, cried Dorian Gray suddenly, I must go out and sit in the garden. The air is stifling here. My dear fellow, I am so sorry. When I am painting, he has certainly not been paying me compliments. Perhaps that's why I don't believe anything he's told me. You know you believe it all, said Lord Henry, looking at him with his dreamy, languorous eyes. I will go out to the garden with you. It is horribly hot in the studio, Basil. Certainly, Harry. Just touch the bell. Lord Henry went out to the garden and found Dorian Gray burying his face in the great cool lilac blossoms, feverishly drinking in their perfume as if it were wine. He came close and put his hand upon his shoulder. You are quite right to do that. The lad started and drew back. Bareheaded, the leaves tossed his rebellious curls, tangling all their gilded threads. There was a look of fear in his eyes, the kind people have when suddenly awakened. His finely chiseled nostrils quivered, some hidden nerve shook the scarlet of his lips, leaving them trembling. Yes, continued Lord Henry, that is one of the great secrets of life, to cure the soul by means of the senses. Dorian Gray frowned and turned his head away. He could not help liking the tall, graceful young man standing by him. His romantic olive-colored face and worn expression interested him. There was something in his low, languid voice that was absolutely fascinating. His cool, white, flower-like hands even had a curious charm. They moved like music as he spoke, seeming to have a language of their own, but he felt afraid of him. And ashamed of that fear. Why had it been left to a stranger to reveal him to himself? He had known Basil Hallward for months, but the friendship between them had never altered him. Suddenly someone had come across his life. Someone who seemed to have disclosed life's mystery. And yet, what was there to be afraid of? He was not a schoolboy or a girl. It was absurd to be frightened. Let us go and sit in the shade. What can it matter? Cried Dorian Gray, as he sat down on the seat at the end of the garden. It should matter. Everything to you. Why? No, you don't feel it now. But someday when you are old, wrinkled, and ugly, when thought has seared your forehead with its lines, and passion has branded your lips with hideous fires, you will feel it. You will feel it terribly. Now, wherever you go, you charm the world. Will it always be so? You have a wonderfully beautiful face, Mr. Gray. Don't frown. You have... And beauty is a form of genius. Higher indeed than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is one of the great facts of the world, like sunlight, or springtime, or the reflection in dark waters of that silver shell we call the moon. Dorian Gray listened, open-eyed and wondering. The spray of lilac slipped from his hand, falling upon the gravel. A furry bee buzzed around it for a moment. He watched it with that strange interest in trivial things, a fascination we try to cultivate when matters of great importance make us afraid, or when we are stirred by some new emotion for which words fail us. Suddenly, the painter appeared at the studio door, making sharp staccato signs for them to come in. They turned to each other and smiled. I am waiting. They rose and sauntered down the walk together. 2 green and white butterflies fluttered past, and from the pear tree at the garden's corner, a thrush began to sing. You are glad. You have met me. As they entered the studio, Dorian Gray placed his hand upon Lord Henry's arm. In that case, Lord Henry flung himself into a large wicker armchair and watched. The sweep and dash of brush on canvas was the only sound breaking the stillness. After about a quarter of an hour, Hallward stopped painting. He looked long at Dorian Gray, then for a long while at the picture, biting the end of one of his huge brushes, frowning. It is quite finished. Lord Henry came over to examine the picture. It was certainly a wonderful work of art, and a wonderful likeness as well. My dear fellow. The lad started, as if awakened from some dream. Is it really finished? He murmured. Quite finished. Dorian made no answer. He passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned to face it. When he saw it, he drew back, his cheeks flushing briefly with pleasure. A look of joy appeared in his eyes, as if for the first time he had truly recognized himself. He stood there, motionless, in wonder, dimly aware that Hallward was speaking, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came upon him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. His eyes deepened into amethyst, and a mist of tears came across them. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. "Don't you like it?" cried Hallward at last. "Of course he likes it. It is not my property. He is a very lucky fellow." "How sad it is," murmured Dorian Gray, still gazing at his portrait. "How sad it is. I shall grow old. I would give my soul for that." "You would hardly care for such an arrangement." "I should object very strongly." Dorian Gray turned and looked at him. "I believe you would." The painter stared in amazement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed angry, his face flushed, his cheeks burning. "Yes. I know." Hallward turned pale and caught his hand. "Dorian, Dorian," he cried. "I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. Jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes steals something from me and gives something to it. Oh, this is your doing." Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. "It is the real Dorian Gray, that is all." "It is not." "If it is not, you should have gone away when I asked you." "I stayed when you asked me." "Harry." Dorian Gray lifted his golden head from the pillow, his face pallid, eyes tear-stained. He looked at him as he walked over to the painting table, set beneath the high-curtained window. What was he doing there? His fingers strayed among the litter of tin tubes and dry brushes, seeking something. Yes, the long palette knife with its thin, lithe steel blade. He found it at last, and was going to rip up the canvas. With a stifled sob, the lad leaped from the couch, rushing to Hallward, tearing the knife from his hand, and flinging it to the far end of the studio. "I am glad you appreciate my work at last." "Appreciate it? I am in love with it." "Well, as soon as it's dry, it shall be varnished, framed, and sent home. You will have tea." "I adore simple pleasures." There came a knock at the door. The butler entered, carrying a laden tea tray, and set it down upon a small Japanese table. Cups and saucers rattled, and a fluted Georgian urn hissed. 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by a page. Dorian Gray went over and poured the tea. The 2 men sauntered languidly to the table and examined what lay under the covers. "Let us go to the theater tonight," said Lord Henry. "There is sure to be something on." "It is such a bore putting on one's dress clothes," muttered Hallward. "And—" "Yes," he answered dreamily. "You really must not say things like that before Dorian, Harry." "Before which Dorian? The one pouring tea for us, or the one in the picture?" "I should like to come to the theater with you." "Then you shall come, and you will come." "I can't, really. I would sooner not. I have a lot of work to do." "Well, I should like that awfully." The painter bit his lip and walked over, cup in hand, to the picture. "I shall stay with the real Dorian." "Is it the real Dorian?" cried the original of the portrait. "Yes, you are just like that." "How wonderful." "At least, you are like it in appearance." "But it will never alter." "What a fuss people make about fidelity," exclaimed Lord Henry. "Why?" "Don't go to the theater tonight," said Hallward. "Stop and dine with me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because I have promised Lord Henry Wotton to go with him." "He won't like you the better for keeping your promises." "He always breaks his own. I beg you, do not go." Dorian Gray laughed and shook his head. I entreat you." The lad hesitated, then looked over at Lord Henry, watching them from the tea table with an amused smile. "I must go," he answered. "Very well." "Certainly. You won't forget?" "No." "And Harry?" "Yes." "Remember what I asked you." "I have forgotten it." "I trust you." "I wish I could trust myself." As the door closed behind them, the painter flung himself down on a sofa. A look of pain came into his face. Chapter 3. At 12:30 next day, Lord Henry Wotton strolled from Curzon Street to the Albany to call on his uncle, Lord Fermor, a genial if somewhat rough-mannered old bachelor. The outside world called him selfish, for he gave no particular benefit to it. But society deemed him generous, as he fed the people who amused him. His father had been our ambassador at Madrid when Isabella was young and prim, unthought of, but retired from diplomacy on a capricious fit of annoyance at not being offered the embassy at Paris, a post he felt entitled to by birth, indolence, the good English of his dispatches, and his inordinate passion for pleasure. The son, once his father's secretary, resigned with his chief, somewhat foolishly, it was thought. Later, upon inheriting the title, he devoted himself to the great aristocratic art of doing absolutely nothing. He owned 2 large townhouses, but preferred chambers, less trouble. Most meals he took at his club. He attended some to his collieries in the Midlands, excusing this industrial taint by the one advantage of coal. It allowed a gentleman the decency of burning wood on his own hearth. In politics, he was a Tory, except when the Tories were in office. Then he roundly abused them as a pack of radicals. A hero to his valet who bullied him, a terror to his relations whom he bullied in return. Only England could have produced him, and he always said the country was going to the dogs. His principles were old-fashioned, but there was much to be said for his prejudices. When Lord Henry entered, he found his uncle in a rough shooting coat, smoking a cheroot and grumbling over the Times. Well, pure family affection. Money. Yes. Well, Mr. Dorian Gray does not belong to the Blue Books. Mr. Dorian Gray? Who is he? Asked Lord Fermor. That is what I have come to learn. Kelso's grandson, echoed the old gentleman. Kelso's grandson, of course. I knew his mother intimately. I believe I was at her christening. She was an extraordinarily beautiful girl. He is very good-looking. I hope he will fall into proper hands. I don't know. Margaret Devereux was one of the loveliest creatures I ever saw. It is rather fashionable to marry Americans just now. I'll back English women against the world. The betting is on the Americans. They don't last. A long engagement exhausts them. Who are her people? Grumbled the old gentleman. Has she got any? Lord Henry shook his head. American girls are as clever at concealing their parents. They're pork packers. I hope so. Is she pretty? She behaves as if she were beautiful. Most American women do. It is the secret of their charm. Why can't these American women stay in their own country? They keep telling us it's paradise for women. It is. That's the reason why. Goodbye. Where are you lunching? At Aunt Agatha's. I've asked myself. And Mr. Gray. He's her latest protégé. Humph. Tell your Aunt Agatha. All right. The old gentleman growled approvingly and rang for his servant. Lord Henry passed up the low arcade into Burlington Street, then turned toward Berkeley Square. So, that was the story of Dorian Gray's parentage. Crudely told as it was, it stirred him nonetheless, evoking a strange, almost modern romance.
A beautiful woman risking everything for a mad passion. A few wild weeks of happiness cut short by a hideous, treacherous crime. Months of voiceless agony, and then a child born in pain. The mother snatched away by death. The boy left to solitude and to the tyranny of an old, loveless man. Yes, it was an interesting background. It posed the lad, made him more perfect, as it were. Behind every exquisite thing that exists, there is something tragic. Worlds must be in travail for the meanest flower to bloom. And how charming he had been at dinner the night before, startled eyes, lips parted in frightened pleasure, sitting opposite him at the club. The red candle shades stained a richer rose on the waking wonder of his face. Talking to him was like playing an exquisite violin. He answered every touch, every thrill of the bow. There was something terribly enthralling in the exercise of influence. No other activity was like it. To project one's soul into some gracious form and let it linger there for a moment. To hear your own intellectual views echoed back with all the added music of passion and youth. To convey your temperament into another as though it were a subtle fluid, a strange perfume. There was real joy in that. Perhaps the most satisfying joy left to us in this limited, vulgar age, an age grossly carnal in its pleasures, and grossly common in its aims. He was a marvelous type, too, this lad whom by such curious chance he'd met in Basil's studio, or could be fashioned into one, at any rate. Grace was his, the white purity of boyhood, beauty like that which old Greek marbles have kept for us. There was nothing one could not do with him. He could be made a Titan or a toy. What a pity that such beauty was destined to fade. Suddenly, he stopped, glanced up at the houses. He found he'd passed his aunts by some distance. Smiling to himself, he turned back. Entering the somewhat somber hall, the butler told him they had gone in to lunch. He handed his hat and stick to a footman and passed into the dining room. "Late as usual, Harry," cried his aunt, shaking her head at him. He invented a facile excuse, took the vacant seat next to her, and looked around to see who was there. Dorian bowed shyly from the end of the table, a flush of pleasure stealing into his cheek. Opposite sat the Duchess of Harley, a lady of admirable good nature and temper, much liked by all who knew her. She had those ample architectural proportions which, in women who are not duchesses, historians now call stoutness. Next to her, on the right, sat Sir Thomas Burden, a radical MP who followed his leader in public life, but in private life followed the best cooks, dining with the Tories, thinking with the Liberals, by a wise and well-known rule. On her left sat Mr. Erskine of Treadley, an old gentleman of charm and culture, who had nonetheless fallen into bad habits of silence, explaining once to Lady Agatha that he'd said everything he had to say before he was 30. His own neighbor was Mrs. Vandeleur, one of his aunt's oldest friends, a perfect saint among women, but so terribly dowdy she reminded one of a badly bound hymn book. Fortunately for him, she had Lord Faudel on the other side, a most intelligent, middle-aged mediocrity, as bald as a ministerial statement in the Commons. She conversed with him in that intensely earnest manner, that one unpardonable error, as he once remarked, which all good people fall into, and from which none ever quite escape. "We're talking about poor Dartmoor, Lord Henry," cried the Duchess, nodding pleasantly across the table. "Do you really think he will marry this fascinating young person?" "I believe she has made up her mind to propose to him, Duchess." "How dreadful!" exclaimed Lady Agatha. "Really, someone should interfere." "I'm told, on excellent authority, that her father keeps an American dry goods store," said Sir Thomas Burden, looking supercilious. "My uncle has already suggested pork packing, Sir Thomas." "Dry goods. What are American dry goods?" asked the Duchess, raising her large hands in wonder, accentuating the verb. "American novels," answered Lord Henry, helping himself to some quail. The Duchess looked puzzled. Don't mind him, my dear, whispered Lady Agatha. He never means anything he says. When America was discovered, began the radical member, and launched into some wearisome facts. Like all who try to exhaust a subject, he exhausted his listeners. I wish to goodness it had never been discovered at all, she exclaimed. Really, our girls have no chance nowadays. It's most unfair. Perhaps, after all, America has never been discovered, said Mr. Erskine. I would say it has merely been detected. Oh, but I've seen specimens of the inhabitants, answered the Duchess vaguely. Most are extremely pretty, and they dress well too. They get all their dresses in Paris. I wish I could afford the same. They say when good Americans die, they go to Paris, chuckled Sir Thomas, who owned a large wardrobe of humorous cast-off clothes. Really? And where do bad Americans go when they die? Inquired the Duchess. They go to America, murmured Lord Henry. Sir Thomas frowned. I'm afraid your nephew is prejudiced against that great country, he said to Lady Agatha. I've traveled all over it in cars provided by directors who are, in such matters, extremely civil. I assure you, it is an education to visit. But must we really see Chicago to be educated? Asked Mr. Erskine plaintively. I don't feel up to the journey. Sir Thomas waved his hand. Mr. Erskine of Treadley has the world on his shelves. We practical men prefer seeing things, not reading about them. Americans are extremely interesting people, absolutely reasonable. I think that is their distinguishing trait. Yes, Mr. Erskine, an absolutely reasonable people. I assure you, no nonsense about Americans. How dreadful, cried Lord Henry. I can stand brute force, but brute reason is quite unbearable. There's something unfair about it. It hits below the intellect. I do not understand you, said Sir Thomas, growing rather red. I do, Lord Henry, murmured Mr. Erskine, with a smile. Paradoxes are all very well, in their way, rejoined the baronet. Was that a paradox? Asked Mr. Erskine. I didn't think so. Perhaps it was. Well, the way of paradoxes is the way of truth. To test reality, we must see it on the tightrope. When verities become acrobats, we can judge them. Dear me, said Lady Agatha, how you men do argue. I'm sure I never make out what you're talking about. Oh, Harry, I'm quite vexed with you. Why try to persuade our nice Mr. Dorian Gray to give up the East End? I assure you, he'd be quite invaluable. They'd love his playing. I want him to play to me, cried Lord Henry, smiling. He looked down the table and caught a bright, answering glance. But they're so unhappy in Whitechapel, continued Lady Agatha. I can sympathize with everything, except suffering, said Lord Henry, shrugging. I cannot sympathize with that. It's too ugly, too horrible, too distressing. There's something terribly morbid about modern sympathy for pain. One should sympathize with color, beauty, the joy of life. The less said about life's sores, the better. Still, the East End remains a very important problem, remarked Sir Thomas, gravely shaking his head. Quite so, answered the young lord. It is the problem of slavery, and we try to solve it by amusing the slaves. The politician looked keenly at him. What change do you propose, then? He asked. Lord Henry laughed. I don't wish to change anything in England, except the weather, he answered. I'm quite content with philosophic contemplation, but as the 19th century has gone bankrupt through over-expenditure of sympathy, I suggest we appeal to science to set us right. The advantage of emotions is that they lead us astray. The advantage of science is that it's not emotional. But we have such grave responsibilities, ventured Mrs. Vandeleur timidly. Terribly grave, echoed Lady Agatha. Lord Henry looked at Mr. Erskine. Humanity takes itself too seriously. That's the world's original sin. If the caveman had known how to laugh, history would have been different. You're really very comforting, warbled the Duchess. I've always felt guilty when visiting your dear aunt, for I take no interest at all in the East End. From now on, I shall look her in the face without a blush. A blush is very becoming, Duchess, remarked Lord Henry. Only when one is young, she answered. When an old woman like me blushes, it's a very bad sign. Ah, Lord Henry, I wish you'd tell me how to be young again. He thought a moment. Can you remember any great error you committed in your early days, Duchess? He asked, looking across the table. A great many, I fear, she cried. Then commit them again, he said gravely. To get back one's youth, one must merely repeat one's follies. A delightful theory, she exclaimed. I must put it into practice. A dangerous theory came from Sir Thomas's tight lips. Lady Agatha shook her head, though amused. Mr. Erskine listened. Yes, he continued. That is one of life's great secrets. Nowadays, most people die of creeping common sense and discover too late that the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes. A laugh ran around the table. He played with the idea, grew willful, tossed it into the air and transformed it, let it escape, then recaptured it, made it iridescent with fancy, and winged it with paradox. The praise of folly soared into philosophy. Philosophy herself became young, catching the mad music of pleasure, wearing, one might fancy, her wine-stained robe and ivy wreath. She danced like a bacchante over life's hills, and mocked slow Silenus for being sober. Facts fled before her like frightened forest creatures. Her white feet trod the huge press where wise Omar sits, till seething grape juice rose in purple bubbles around her bare limbs, or crawled in red foam over the vat's black, dripping, sloping sides. It was an extraordinary improvisation. He felt Dorian Gray's eyes fixed on him, and the knowledge that among his audience was one whose temperament he wished to fascinate seemed to sharpen his wit and brighten his imagination. He was brilliant, fantastic, irresponsible. He charmed his listeners out of themselves. They followed his pipe, laughing. Dorian Gray never took his gaze off him. He sat as one under a spell, smiles chasing over his lips, and wonder turning grave in his darkening eyes. At last, liveried in the costume of the age, reality entered the room, a servant, to tell the Duchess her carriage was waiting. She wrung her hands in mock despair. How annoying, she cried. I must go. I have to call for my husband at the club, to take him to some absurd meeting at Willis's rooms, where he's to be in the chair. If I'm late, he'll be furious, and I couldn't have a scene in this bonnet. It's far too fragile. A harsh word would ruin it. No, I must go, dear Agatha. Goodbye, Lord Henry. You're quite delightful, and dreadfully demoralizing. I don't know what to say about your views. You must dine with us some night. Tuesday? Are you free Tuesday? For you, Duchess, I would throw over anyone, said Lord Henry. Ah, that's very nice and very wrong of you, she cried. So mind you come. She swept out of the room, followed by Lady Agatha and the other ladies. When Lord Henry sat down again, Mr. Erskine moved closer, took a chair beside him, and placed his hand upon his arm. You talk books away, he said. Why don't you write one? I am too fond of reading books to care to write them, Mr. Erskine. I should like to write a novel, certainly. A novel as lovely as a Persian carpet, and as unreal. But there is no literary public in England for anything except newspapers, primers, and encyclopedias. Of all people in the world, the English have the least sense of the beauty of literature. I fear you are right, answered Mr. Erskine. I myself used to have literary ambitions, but I gave them up long ago. And now, my dear young friend, if you will allow me to call you so, may I ask, did you really mean all that you said to us at lunch? I quite forget what I said, smiled Lord Henry. Was it all very bad? Very bad indeed. In fact, I consider you extremely dangerous, and if anything happens to our good Duchess, we shall all look on you as primarily responsible. But I would like to talk to you about life. The generation into which I was born was tedious. Some day, when you're tired of London, come down to Treadley and expound to me your philosophy of pleasure over some admirable Burgundy I am fortunate to possess. I shall be charmed.
A visit to Treadley would be a great privilege. It has a perfect host and a perfect library.
You will complete it, answered the old gentleman, with a courteous bow.
And now I must bid goodbye to your excellent aunt. I am due at the Athenaeum. It's the hour when we sleep there.
All of you, Mr. Erskine? 40 of us in 40 armchairs.
We are practicing for an English Academy of Letters.
Lord Henry laughed and rose.
I am going to the park, he cried.
As he was passing out of the door, Dorian Gray touched him on the arm.
Let me come with you, he murmured. But I thought you had promised Basil Hallward to go and see him, answered Lord Henry.
I would sooner come with you.
Yes, I feel I must come with you. Do let me. And you will promise to talk to me all the time? No one talks as wonderfully as you do.
Ah, I have talked quite enough for today, said Lord Henry, smiling.
All I want now is to look at life. You may come and look at it with me, if you care to.
One afternoon, a month later, Dorian Gray reclined in a luxurious armchair in the little library of Lord Henry's Mayfair house. It was, in its way, a very charming room. High-paneled wainscoting of olive-stained oak, cream-colored frieze, and a ceiling of raised plasterwork, and a brick-dust felt carpet strewn with silk, long-fringed Persian rugs. On a tiny satinwood table stood a statuette by Clodion, and beside it lay a copy of Les Cent Nouvelles, bound for Margaret of Valois by Clovis Eve and powdered with gilt daisies chosen by the Queen herself. Large blue china jars and parrot tulips adorned the mantelshelf. Through the small leaded window panes streamed the apricot-colored light of a London summer's day. Lord Henry had not yet come in. He was always late on principle, his principle being that punctuality is the thief of time. So the lad looked rather sulky as, with listless fingers, he turned the pages of an elaborately illustrated Manon Lescaut he found in a bookcase. The formal, monotonous ticking of the Louis XIV's clock annoyed him. Once or twice, he thought of going away. At last, he heard a step outside. The door opened. "How late you are, Harry," he murmured.